Welcome to another episode of War Hero to Superhero, helping military, veterans, and first responders transform their lives from the bedroom to the boardroom. I am Daniel Faust, and I gotta change my slide real quick. So we are in the Superhero Battle Room, and we bring War Hero to Superhero transformations for you to go over and to thrive off. Because I can pass you wisdom all day long, but guess what? You're gonna hear it better from the people that have already gone through the frag and back. So come jump in, play with the buttons to go over and figure out how to navigate life. And Tammi Moses is going to come over and show us how she navigated life from the military now to helping people with hoarding issues. Helps you to clean life and to go over and to thrive. So I'm going to bring her in. She's going to tell a story. And questions and comments are so allowed, it's ridiculous, just so you know. It's always a conversation. So we're going to bring you in, and we're going to get this party started. Hey, Tammi, do I have you?
Hi, Daniel. Yes, thank you for having me today.
Awesome. So we first want you to go over and share, just like every War Hero superhero transformation, what is the War Hero story? How long were you in? When did you get out of the service? And how was it? Was it great? Was it sucky? In between? We'd love to hear it.
Well, thank you for having me. I don't know that I would not consider myself a war hero. I went into the military, the Navy, in 1992, and I served for 4 years until 1996. And so I came in right after there was so much going on in the Middle East. And but my goal in joining, I think I became patriotic later. Primarily, I wanted to escape where I grew up, and I wanted to do that under my own power, if you will. And the recruiter happened to visit the career center in my senior year of high school, and I stopped in and talked with them that day, and they basically sold me on the benefits of, the military aspect of 3 hots and a cot, money for school, and of course the house. I really wanted a house someday of my own, and so there was a lot of draw, and I wanted to travel. So but the twist on it is I had a younger brother that had Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, and he was a freshman and I was a senior, and so generally at lunchtime I was helping him and with getting food and whatever he needed to get through the rest of his day. And that day in particular, he had gone to Children's Hospital in Seattle with my parents, and so I had a free lunch period, which is how I ended up strolling into the recruiter's office. So it kind of just evolved into enlistment, and I went to boot camp in Orlando at 2 months after high school graduation, and it kind of went from there. I did not have a school, like an A school, which I would highly recommend going in with a school. I had recommendations to do that, and I didn't really listen because I was more focused on leaving. Like, I wasn't too concerned with where I was going per se. I just wanted to leave. And now that I'm much older and I reflect on it, when what I wanted wasn't available, I should have said, well, what else do you have? Like, this is a big Navy, right? There must have been something else I could have done that would have gotten me a school. But in any case, I went from Orlando to San Diego, and then I was stationed on the ship out of Guam, the USS Niagara Falls. And through that opportunity, I got to see what we call haze, gray, and underway briefly. We did spend a lot of time in port, actually. But I got to travel, which was one of my goals, and see different places, Australia, Japan, and, areas in Korea. And so I got to see a lot of places I probably wouldn't have seen. And through that process, I became a personnelman, and I was learning about cranes and how to navigate all that. But I had the chance to get out of the hot sun, and I took that choice and became a personnelman, passed my test so I could go to a new command, actually as an E4. So I became a petty officer, which was good. I spent about a year and a half on the ship, and then the rest of my time I was in Guam on shore duty there. And when I got out of the service, I separated in California because I met someone that I married, and he was stationed in California for about a year and a half. We actually went back to Guam, and so I went there as a spouse, and that was an interesting thing to go from active duty to military spouse. I guess the best way to explain it is you kind of lose a status in a way, because you're used to being treated almost the same, like you're both active duty, so you're both equal. But anyway, so it was an adjustment for me to, because I understood it from a perspective of I was active duty before, but it was still probably a shift in my attitude was required so that I did not so I didn't overpower anything. Like I knew that I had to kind of step back as the spouse, and so I did that. But I don't know if I'd recommend that course of action when you are going through transitions already, and then you step into a marriage. And ultimately, I did a lot of different jobs when I got out of the service. I worked in a call center. I finally landed a small role with the Boy Scouts of America in Guam, and so I got to run their little shop there, and that was kind of probably my first taste of freedom in a job, where the director was like, "Do what you want, have a sale, make a flyer, like, you know, this is your thing, do it." And so I had a lot of fun doing that. It was hard to find my footing, and I didn't immediately go to college or do some of those things. And so I think I struggled with the fact that I was a veteran, that I had these benefits I could use, and I feel like I wasn't really aware of all the things that I could have been doing at that time. And so I think even today there's still this struggle. There's a disconnect between now whether you retire or you separate, you know, your honorable discharge, whatever. I think there's a disconnect between what is available and what we tell people is available. And so I think that's a challenge that some of us are stepping in to try to meet, where people can be aware of what's out there. And it's not always college, you know, not everyone, that's not always the answer for everyone. And I would say the lowest point for me when I got out was probably when I was trying to find a job. Like, I was trying to find something that paid well-ish. And I didn't know anyone when I went to California, so it was very weird to be job searching and finding something where you could actually take some of your skills into that space. I wasn't like super high on the food chain, but I was in like charge of people. Like, hey, it's your duty section, you know, you're going to make all these 10 people go do stuff. And so it was kind of strange to go into an environment where it was like, sit down, be quiet. You get to go to the bathroom in 2 hours. Don't be late. Like, there was this like intense like supervisory thing that I don't think I expected, because I had already been kind of independent. You know, I wasn't really a sailor you had to babysit. Like, you would tell me what to do and I would go do it. I might give you a little guff if I thought it was dumb, but I would go do it. And I think it was hard to figure out like my resume and what skills do I bring to the table. And it's kind of weird if you are a female that's been in the military. Like, people look at you like, what, like, why? Why was that your choice? And you don't necessarily want to get into that in a job interview. You know, you're just like, hey, I have skills. I know how to show up on time. You know, I can type, I can answer a phone, I can do a lot of this stuff. And honestly, the rate that I was in closely fits with HR roles, and
Yeah.
resources and pay and stuff. So, but the weird part is I never really did any of that when I got out. I did a lot of stuff with financial things, but not really HR things. Um, so I think trying to figure out who I was, and that low point probably lasted for a good year or more, trying to
Wow.
figure out all the pieces. And although in that time period, like I separated in July, and by like October, I actually had a pretty good job where I was processing medical claims, and
Mhm.
I had a nice desk. And someone was leaving, and I went in to talk to my boss, and I'm like, so that job that she's leaving, like, can I apply for that job? He's
That's a good
like,
question.
um, oh, you don't like being out front? I'm like, well, it's fine, but I think there's more I could learn here. And so I stepped into from like sorting the mail and reception duties into processing claims. And so it meant I had a desk with a window. It meant it, and I just got to learn more things there. But that was my first taste of, oh, what if I like ask if there's
Yeah.
something else I could do? And I think that was that started my shift into a more positive experience and a more, oh, I can do this type of thing. And I think one of the challenges as a military spouse is you move a lot. And so
Mhm.
I had a good job for about a year, but then we moved, and I was right back to, well, now what am I going to do? Like, and the
Yeah.
thing that both times that I found something really good was actually through a temporary agency. And so there is a lot to be said for finding what works for you.
Mhm.
And um, sometimes those people are a little more keyed into what employers are looking for, and not always, because I've had some weird experiences with temporary agencies, but
Mhm.
primarily they were really helpful in helping me find a job that I actually enjoyed and that seemed to fit some of my skill sets. So, um, and the thing is that we really define who we are with our job or our ability to earn income. And if you don't have that, I think it makes it harder. And I know now there are some more programs and things like that that help people transition, a little easier, I think, into
Mhm.
certain fields or certain things. But again, I think it's not mentioned enough. It's not talked about enough, that transition piece of the military. And I think that's what contributes to it being really difficult. And if you add on to that a wife and kids and or husband, like, you have all these extra stressors on you that
Mhm.
I think contribute to some of the issues we see in our veteran community.
No, I'd 100% agree. And you got out during the 90s, like the economy was high, but we didn't know how to deal with veteran transition. You probably only had like a day or two of like transitional assistance, and it's just, and then you get this new role that you're kind of supported, but you still want to up yourself and grow yourself. And we're used to being directed, and now it's self-directed, and we have to learn to be innovative and ask. I mean, those things are hard. When I got out in 2012, it was pretty much the same thing. If I didn't ask, I didn't have anybody to quote unquote mentor me. So I totally could see I wasn't there in the 90s, but I could just see as I talked to other people that it was even harder, especially as a lady. We still are growing military services and veteran services for the ladies. So I want to thank you for going over and being part of that community. So going from there, I want to hear, how did you transform? So you were working these admin jobs, you got into medical claims and whatnot. How did you go over and transform? Because when I saw you at MIC, it's like a powerhouse lady that goes at military influencer conference, and I'm like, wow. So what made you go from like office job to now being in this space?
So after I was stationed, well, after my then husband was stationed on Guam, we came back to Whidbey Island. So
Mhm.
I'm about 2 hours north of Seattle, and I had a couple jobs here, and I I ended up working for the state for about 12 and a half years, and I learned some good things there, some facilitation skills. When I first started, my opinion was that I was there to help people, and I feel like that was the initial when I started, I feel like that was the initial way that we were operating as an entity. Like we were there to try to help people get what they needed. And over time, it really became more about numbers and how can you perform. And while I understood that, I feel like we lost the connection with the people we were trying to serve. And I started to see that I could really connect with people outside of the entity walls, if you will. And I did some outreach where I was actually out of the office and I was sitting at basically kitchen tables, in resource centers around a table talking about what's going on with people and the assistance they were needing. And I started to see that I really could make a connection with people. And I think that was my first clue that I needed to do something more besides spend my career in a cubicle. And I started to embrace that I was a veteran, even though that had helped me get hired. Like you get extra whatever percentage on your test or whatever to work for that entity. It took me a while to realize that I had a lot more skills that I could start using. And so I kind of embraced the idea that I was a veteran, and I went to a conference for women veterans in Seattle. And through that process, I came into contact with veteran women igniting the spirit of entrepreneurship, which is VWise through Syracuse University. And I attended their workshop and I registered for their stuff. And that kind of started the journey into a business. And initially, I wanted to talk about housing. And my parent company is Homes Are for Living, LLC. And I wanted to try to figure out ways to solve homelessness in our area and the crisis of low or of affordable housing. Like our nation has a crisis, but I saw it really alive in my community. And so I kind of started looking into how could I be a housing provider or something. And it turns out that hoarding has a lot to do with the fact that people can be evicted. There's a lot of trauma involved. In my observation and opinion, the underlying reason is trauma, and that's why people hoard. And it's because they haven't addressed whatever issue they've experienced in their life, and this is a coping skill. It's their coping mechanism is to gather things to them to keep them away. But the reason that I really started to talk about it is I realized that I had grown up in that environment. It wasn't quite as extreme at that point when I was living there, but it definitely had the elements of too much clutter. You couldn't have people over comfortably. And I realized that I had grown up with this and that a lot of people had, but a lot of people were afraid and hesitant to step out and say publicly, hey, this is what I've experienced. And I started to come up with like, oh, well, this is how I survived. This is what I did as a youth living there, not even realizing that was what I was doing. And I came across a group called Children of Hoarders, and I started to read about that. And I realized I wasn't the only one. And the common theme I have seen is most of us who've grown up with that don't really recognize that we're not the only one. Like you think you're it, like you're isolated and alone and you can't have your friends over. And in my case, we didn't have running water and there were weird things, and I was growing up in the 80s and it was kind of weird to not have running water. Right. So there was a fire in our pump house when I was about 12, I think 11 or 12. And I can remember my brother and I standing there looking at the fire. My parents went out there, firefighters came, they put it out. But the reason that fire started is because there was like piles of stuff in there and a light bulb got on fire. And so once that happened, we basically didn't have running water again. And that was kind of weird. And we hauled water. And so we were like this weird water hauling family. But I only recently realized how much more difficult that must have been for my brother, who was also in a wheelchair. And so he had all those kind of things to deal with as far as judgment and opening doors and not being able to access buildings because he couldn't open the door physically. I mean, there was just all these other additional things. And I have come to realize that part of my role and part of my speaking out is because I was pretty angry that I had to grow up that way. And it wasn't until I stepped into business that I started to connect with other people who started what they were doing because of some experience they had, and they wanted to change it for other people. They didn't want other people to struggle the same way. And that kind of helped me grow into the person I became, because I started to realize that there's a lot of power in telling your story. There's a lot of power in creating space so that other people can tell theirs and be comfortable enough to share with you. And that has evolved into a podcast. I have had a blog for a while, but the podcast came about directly because of MidBC and the connections there with Mark Dudek and Richard Kaufman were very instrumental, as well as Daniel Curry. You know, it's one of those things where you read about somebody scratched an idea out on a napkin and it came to life. Well, that's exactly what happened.
Napkins are very powerful. I really do. I really think I use back of envelopes.
Yes. I've got notebook paper. Like, I buy reams of paper when it's time to go back to school, right? And I buy paper because I'm very much pen to paper. I guess I use tech, but I know enough to use some technology. I'll put it that way. But I'm very much still a pen to paper. You know, that's my thought process. And I've read a book that Stephen King wrote about how he wrote his books. He was using drugs, you know, while a lot of the people did that. But one of the things he did is pen to paper, and that's how he wrote a lot of his things. And so I felt like if that's how he did it, then maybe there's something I can learn there as to what I'm doing. And another person when it comes to writing is Anne Lamott, and she does a lot of that too. And she talks about, well, crappy first drafts. And so that's really key, I think, sometimes when you're trying to figure out where you're going. Sometimes you just have to recognize that you're in this place that's kind of crappy, and you have to embrace it. And I believe the term for one of the branches is embrace the suck. And, you know, sometimes in life, that's what we do. And I think when you're looking at how are you going to get to your next level or your next step, I think sometimes you have to just really lean into whatever thing is going on in your life. And I know one of the things that you talk about is family and marriage, and I see so much value in the people that are super committed to those things in their life. And I know, thankfully can say I know a lot of those people now, but there was a period of time in my life when I did not, or what I saw was not something I would want. So part of my transformation involved what I call a necessary divorce, because there are certain parameters that I felt like marriage should be. And when the other person stepped completely out of that, I was like, this is not going to work for me. And so a part of my transformation also included going to therapy and working with a therapist to work through a lot of my own emotional things, as well as work through the fact that I had grown up in a hoarded home and had all this trauma and isolation, and I felt like I didn't have good relationships with a lot of people because I didn't know how. Like, I didn't know how to do that well. And all that to say that all those steps and all those things are what helped me transform into who I am. And I see the need, and what I really focus on now is around mindset, because you have to look at where are you at mentally. Are you dealing with PTSD? Are you dealing with trauma? Are you dealing with some kind of domestic violence? Or is your life awesome and you feel like you could share from that perspective? Because I think sometimes people will say, I don't have a story, it's not as bad as yours. We're in this comparison game. But honestly, there's probably something in your story that someone else can relate to. So I don't think it's helpful to compare yourself to other people. Like you're competing against you, which is probably one of the most important things, for someone to look at is where are you at and where are you trying to go? And I really try to bring that into the virtual work that I've done, the workshops, and things where people are like, they're struggling, right? And it's not always massive hoarding. Sometimes it's, I need to sell my house and I've cleared every room but this one room where the military flag is, where my baby shoes are, whatever it is. And people need help to just navigate that. And so one of the things I try to do is just keep it very simple. Like, what are you keeping? What are you donating? What are you discarding? Or what belongs to someone else? Put their name on a box, put all their stuff in it, and then you can hand it to them. And now you're not responsible for dealing with their stuff. They are. And I've had clients where their kids moved out and left stuff behind, right? So now they're like, now I have my kids' baseball cards and stuffed animals. I'm like, put it in a box, put it in a bag. I'm moving. Here you go. You deal with it. And now you're not the bad guy. And I think you have to really address your mindset. And for me, it's been really key in looking at where am I at and where do I want to go, and recognizing that wealth is not just money. Wealth is the people you know. Wealth is the connections you have. And there's like this abundance all around us if we stop and look at that. And I had a conversation recently with someone who was like, well, I'm poor. Like, we could live here because we're poor. I'm like, no, I don't accept that. I worked really hard to shift that mindset into abundance and positiveness. I'm not saying I don't see the dirt and the negativity and the rats in the hoard sometimes, or I'm not saying I don't see that. I'm just saying I choose not to live in it. And I think what really resonates for me when someone separates from the military is figuring out what is your next mission, what is your purpose now, because we were so used to having that. We're so used to having our like, I would say an evaluation, like yearly. You have your evaluation, you have your status, you know where you're at. And I think that's what ends up being missing, is we end up working for people sometimes who don't understand that that's what we measure ourselves by. Like, that's what we need to know where we're going. And if you move into business, I think it's similar. You have to look at where are you going, and or even in your life, where's your marriage going? Where's your career? Where's your college taking you? What's your the purpose of your business? Or even if you're just you, what's your purpose? What's your mission now? And finding out what that is, I think, is really key to being successful and wanting to stay on Earth and not step into the idea that suicide is the solution, or that drugs or alcohol or any other destructive behavior is a solution, because people self-medicate. People drown themselves in alcohol because they don't have other coping mechanisms. And for most of us, the military involved drinking of some kind. I was generally the designated driver, so I come at it from I would kind of call it the babysitting perspective, where you made sure everybody got home okay, type of thing. And honestly, that can be kind of a burden, because you're like, when do I ever get a chance to just like not be responsible? Not to a stupid level, but just when do I have to not worry about other people? But I also see a lot of us stepping into it as a caretaker role because that's what we knew. And so it's familiar to help people that are having a problem, I guess. And the other part of that is we always want to, I think sometimes we want to change other people. We want to tell them what to do. We want to, we wish better things for them than they wish on themselves. And I think that's the hard part, is knowing that you can't change someone else. Like, you can give them tools, you can be a guide, you can show up, you can give them everything they need, but that change has to come from within. And depending on where your faith is or whatever, but it helps me know I'm not alone. Even the times when I was mad at God, or I would question what he was doing or whatever, it helps me to know that I'm not alone, and that it does give me some kind of grounding, I would say. And so in some ways I feel fortunate that I grew up in a church and had a youth group and did all that, because I really think those were things that helped me stay alive. I mean, just from an emotional perspective. And it showed me that people did care about me outside of my immediate family, because a lot of us go through chaotic things, right, growing up. But
we all do.
yeah, I mean, it's like you can't really escape childhood without some kind of trauma of some kind, whether it's it in your family or bullying, or you didn't quite fit, or you moved 97 times, and it's hard to reestablish relationships. I mean, it seems like people don't recognize what kids go through sometimes. They kind of get lost in that shuffle. And I think remembering that they are little people that are also being impacted, I think helps kids feel like they matter more than some of them do. But that's why I think it's really important, where if you are in a relationship, if you do have kids, if you are choosing that path, they didn't ask to come here, like you know. And I think I'm an auntie. I don't personally have kids, but I really like that role, because my aunts and my uncles were very instrumental in helping me see other aspects of living, and taking me to their home in the summer, and just making sure I knew there was more out there in the world. And I think a lot of adults around kids can be that role model. I don't know if I would say I was a role model, but I see where my relatives did what they could given the circumstances. And my dad wasn't real happy that they insisted I come and visit them or things like that. But it still, my one aunt helped me shop for school clothes before I was a freshman in high school. She's like, I want you to have like normal clothes. Like, tell your dad you need money. And I did. And I had never really approached him that way before. Like, hey, my aunt says we're going shopping and I need $300 or whatever it was. And he gave it to me, but it was kind of lessons in how you can help a kid, even though you think maybe you're not helping a kid. And now I reflect on that. And a lot of times, as the adult kid of parents that hoard, people will say, well, how come, or we'll ask ourselves, like, how come nobody did anything? But now that I'm older, I see that they were doing what they could do, given their lives and their kids and whatever they had going on. So I'm really grateful for the people who chose to step in and do something, and I think part of transformation is figuring out, what do you bring to the table and how can you use that for the good of other people. And it's something that I had someone really say they wanted to connect with me, because I took the term CEO and I coined it to be Chief Encouragement Officer. And I realized that was a role I had been playing for many years in various circumstances. And then once I stepped into business, I'm like, well, I'm going to play. And most of the time, I mean, telling your story or getting into that can be really emotionally hard, but a lot of the times it doesn't really feel like work. It feels like you're on purpose. You're moving toward something greater than you, and I believe once you start to recognize that whatever you're doing is not really about you, like you bring you to it, but the story is, and the impact you can have is far beyond, me sitting in my little old chair with the laptop, um, so anyway, that's kind of where I see people can make a big difference. And I know we worry, like, am I making a difference? Is anybody paying attention to what I'm doing? And yeah, you never know who is. That's the thing. You never know. Like, I think you said something like, I walked into Mick DC like a powerhouse.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like each of you are just experienced powerhouse, like thriving, and I come in and I'm like little guy, But I think that's the lie we all believe, is that our transformation is not transformative. We look at ourselves and we are the worst judge, and we do this to ourselves.
Exactly.
So, and I'd love for you to go over and take all this wisdom that you shared with us, and could you summarize, like, what three major things made you transform, or what would you give somebody that you're helping in that hoarding? Because hoarding can be not just physical manifestation, it's an emotional, maybe even a spiritual, mental manifestation. What would you give them to help them transform in that?
So I think the first thing is to look at, well, the first thing is to get really honest about what's going on. For you mentally, for you physically, for your health, for your space. Really get really clear and honest about what's really going on. And that can lead you to figuring out what steps you can take to rectify it. I mean, are you going to lose your housing because of the stuff? Are you going to lose your kids? Are you going to get evicted? Like, what is the next thing that's going to happen if you don't face what's going on? And so you need to be honest. You need to look at, what do you stand to lose if this continues? What do you have to gain? But what do you have to lose is usually what's going on. And also, it's hard to sum it into three, but as you start taking steps, celebrate the steps that you're taking. Like, be glad that you have the opportunity to fix it now while you can. And so I think it's really about getting really clear on what's happening, get really clear on what result you want to have, and then be happy and celebrate that result as you get, as I would say, not just as you get the result, but as you're working toward it. Like, have these little milestones, and don't think you're going to solve a huge problem in 20 minutes. Like, it probably took longer than that to create it. So you're going to have to take some time to break it down. And so if you are a person who has decided you're going to start clearing your space on your own, start small, take a basket, take it to wherever you watch TV and sort that out. If you go into a room, I hear this a lot. If you open the door and you look in and then you shut the door and walk away,
yeah,
that could be a clue that you might need to deal with some of the stuff in that room. But it can be really hard to walk into it and be like, I have to sit here in this. Like, no, like, take what you need to work on and take it out of that space, and keep it very simple. Keep, donate, discard. Maybe you have a burn bag, whatever it is. But the decision piece is where people falter, because you're afraid if you throw something out or burn it or whatever, that you're going to want it later or need it later. And so just be very aware of what's going on with you, I think, is the key. And if you really have like serious hoarding issues and you have serious trauma issues that you have not addressed, I would recommend finding someone you trust and you can talk with about whatever underlying things are going on, particularly in hoarding, because if you don't address it yourself and someone forces your hand, it's very easy to recreate it very quickly because you didn't deal with whatever was causing you to hoard in the first place. So that's part of why forced cleanouts sometimes are necessary, but they aren't always effective because the person hasn't had time to deal with their issues and they haven't been involved with the decision-making process, which is part of the issue.
That makes beautiful sense, because if you don't deal with the heart, the stuff just comes back, or more stuff comes back in that particular regard. So that was a beautiful summarization of your superhero tactics. So can you tell us a little more about this website right here before we close out and how they connect with you?
So I have a website called homesareforliving.com, and one of my favorite things on there is the blog. So the blog is homesareforliving.com/blog, I guess. But anyway, if you go to that website, and I have a way to make an appointment there if you'd like, and I have the blog there, and I'm creating a media page, so some of the episodes like this can be viewed there, some of the interviews and things that I've done. But I talk about it a lot from the perspective of being the adult kid of a parent that hoards, and that is not always a perspective everyone appreciates unless you have experienced it. But ideally, long term, I will have more resources and things there for people to find it, because again, there's a disconnect between what's out there and where you might need the resource, and it's just it's a starting point for people to connect with me. And I have an email, thehoardingsolution@gmail.com or homesareforliving@gmail.com. So also, and I have a group, the Hoarding Solution group, on Facebook, where I'm inviting people to come because we need a space to talk about this as far as professionals that come across it, but also family members and different nonprofit groups and faith groups and things like that who come across this, but they really don't know what to do. And that's part of the issue, is we don't say anything because we don't know what to say. So we need a starting point, and the website is really a place where my blog lives, honestly. But I'm happy to connect with people because I want them to know they're not alone, and I want them to know that you don't have to face it alone. Like, it's very isolating when you think no one gets what you're going through. So I want to change that. I want to change that conversation so that the 19 million people that it's estimated have a hoarding problem in the U.S. are not dealing with it by themselves, and their family members aren't dealing with it by themselves. It's just way overwhelming to face some of these things on your own and feeling like you have no one who understands.
And that's huge. That's huge. So I want to thank you for going over and joining us. The people that are going over and watching, I want to thank you watching from Facebook and YouTube and on the Easy Way wall and even Roku. If this resonates with you in your heart, we'd love for you to go watch all 43 minutes of episodes. Gain those quote-unquote golden grenades, as Chris, one of the, I'm blanking on the Chris that calls it all the time, Chris Hoffman goes over and talks about that. If you're gaining those golden grenades, awesome, great. And we love you to watch all 44 minutes of the episode. But if you can't, the way for Tammi to go lift this up to the next level to television is just 3 seconds of time. So 3 seconds on Facebook goes over and amplifies this as a view. If she gets the most views in 3 days, then she goes over and gets uplifted to the television, because 19 million Americans are struggling with this. Why not get the message out there? You can help her get the message out there by you giving 3 seconds of time. But please glean more than 3 seconds, because we want this message to go over and resonate. So we want to thank you for joining. Tammi, any last words before we close up?
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm happy to connect with anyone who would like to. I'm open to hearing what's happening with people.
Awesome. And this is always a conversation, guys. Always remember that every episode of War Hero Superhero is a dialogue, never a monologue. So the comments, pour them in. So we want to thank you for all for joining, and we'll catch you tomorrow with another episode of War Hero